This Sunday we continue our series, Lost in Translation. Last week we began talking about some of the complexities of the Hebrew lexicon when we take a word from Hebrew and translate it into English, that oftentimes we either maintain just the sound of that word, for example, the proper name Adam, which we talked about, Adam, the first human being. But there are also times that we lose the sound of the word, which is also important, and we only retain the meaning. And when we do that, we lessen the message that some verses have, some passages have for our lives, because we limit what the original author was trying to communicate. During this time together through this series, we're going to be focusing on ways that we can be looking at the Bible differently, that we can be expanding our thought process, because we should all now understand, and I will continually remind you, that the Bible was not originally written in English, that Jesus did not speak English, I will amend that I won't say that God can't speak English, but when we're talking about the Bible, most of it was written in Hebrew or Greek, and I don't speak either of those languages, so I'm glad that it's in English. But when we do that, there's some problems. Today we're going to talk about some of them. Each day that we go through this, I'm providing a resource, something for you to read that will hopefully impact how you look at your biblical readings. This time, the title is actually wrong. It's The Year of Living Biblically by A.J. Jacobs. This is a very different resource than the last one. It reads more like a narrative. If you say, I want to learn more, but I need it to be a little bit more like the John Grisham novels that I love reading because I'm more of a fiction person. This isn't fiction, but it's written like a diary, and he's talking, it's I think, quite funny, but it will change how you look at the Bible. To give you just a sneak peek, this is, what you can't see is the subtitle says, One Man's Humble Quest to Follow the Bible as Literally as Possible. And what A.J. Jacobs did, said for 1 year he was going to make sure that he followed all 613 commandments in the Bible by the very letter of how they were written. So there's a lot of very literal, confusing and awkward moments in here that are very fun to read about. But there's some good theology there as well about how we cannot just look at the English on the page and leave it at that. So I encourage you, I have just the one version, and I don't know how much it is on Amazon, but you could probably buy it, just over $9. You can probably even get it used for cheaper. This is a fun one. This is one that you might actually give to other people when you're done reading it, so check it out. And I don't know the author of this one, so there's no kickbacks or anything. So today we're going to be covering another situation, a series of shortcomings of the English language when translated from Hebrew. We're going to be looking at a passage from Deuteronomy, which is one of those ones right at the beginning that we don't talk a whole lot about. But just a fun fact, Huey, Dewey, and Louie, Dewey's full name is Deuteronomy. So this is chapter 4, verses 44 and 45 if you want to follow along, but this is going to be what I reference throughout this lesson. This is the law Moses sets before the Israelites. These are the stipulations, decrees, and laws Moses gave them when they came out of Egypt. Now you want to know what he said before that, like what are the laws? We're not going to talk about that today. What we're going to talk about is when we look at Hebrew words, oftentimes they have more than one meaning. And this should not be a surprise because English words are that way, right? We have things that mean more than one thing, that have different contextual clues to what they mean, but can be confusing. And actually, I feel like every sitcom I've ever seen has an episode where, like, somebody misunderstands a phrase because of the dual meaning of a word, right? We have the same issue when we try to take a Hebrew word and make it in English. We often lose one of the meanings because we have to choose a word in English that I would say probably all the time has a different set of secondary meanings or doesn't have any secondary meanings. To give you, last week I gave you a non-Hebrew example. We have a short video clip to show some of the fun that you can have when you have dual meanings of words.
Excuse me. Are you the Bluths?
Dr. Wordsmith, how's my son?
He's going to be all right.
Oh,
thank God.
Finally, some good news
There's
from
no
this
other
guy.
way to take that.
That's a great attitude. I gotta tell you, if I was getting this news, I don't know that I'd take it this well.
But you said he was all right.
Yes, he's lost his left hand, so he's going to be all right.
In case you missed that, he lost his left hand, so he's going to be all right. It comes from Arrested Development, and that doctor does this every season. It's fantastic. So we have these dual meanings of things that can be both confusing at best, but there's also some interesting things about the Hebrew dual meaning. Sometimes that word means a little bit of both at the same time. And when we change it, we lose some of that. And if you don't believe me or are confused to what that is, any parent or teacher or adult who's worked with children before knows that there is a difference between hearing and obeying. Right? But Shema means hearing and obeying. Now, for me to say someone hears something is very different than me saying obey something. And oftentimes in the Bible, God is telling us to hear something with Shema. He says, hear me when I say this. But there's an expectation. It's not just about, yeah, I gotcha, okay. We're supposed to obey. And this is, when we change the word to just be one of these, when we say Shema, oh, that's here. First, we dismiss that there's a dual meaning, and we negate that this word it can and often means both at the same time. When we look at what we're going to be talking about today, the word Torah, you might be familiar with this word because that's what we call the first couple books of the Bible, first 5 books of the Bible. And by we, I mean our Jewish heritage. Calls the first books of the Bible the Torah. And that's because the word Torah means law. And this is where you find all of those laws that A.J. Jacobs was living by in the Torah. But Torah also means instruction. And this is really an important distinction to understand because we have laws, right? And we have to follow these laws, or we have to choose to follow these laws, or we have to not get caught breaking these laws. As I did a lot of driving on Thursday, I drove to Michigan and back for a visitation, and I had lots of opportunities to explore speed limits and laws in that way. And so we have this very clear idea of what a law is. And oftentimes what we do is we take that understanding of law because, like that passage in Deuteronomy, this is the law Moses set before the Israelites. We're talking about all of the Levitical law, all of the things, all of the verses you see people writing on signs when they're marching around yelling. They all come from the Torah, and they're all because we say this is the law. That God says you cannot not do this. But that's not the depth of what Torah can and often does mean. When we look at Torah also meaning instruction, we know what instructions are, right? It's the things we don't read until we can't figure it out halfway through, and then we pull it out of the box and see where we went wrong, right? That's actually a lot closer to most of what we're looking at in the Torah, things we've been doing wrong, and we need to look at the actual instructions. I would say most of the time use instruction instead of law and better understand what the original authors had in mind when they wrote these sentences down for us. Because the way that we do look at this, in Psalm 27, Torah is translated as teach. Teach me your way, O Lord, and lead me on a level path because of my enemies. This is the same word, Torah. So these two verses, this is the law of Moses set before the Israelites. These are their stipulations, decrees, and laws. Teach me your way, O Lord. Those have two very different vibes, right? They're the same word. And it really shapes how we understand the word Torah, shapes our understanding of who God is. Is God a judge? Is God a machine that does every single thing? It says, you broke this law, this is the mandatory minimum sentence, we're done? Or is God like a parent who's instructing us, who might be disciplining us, much like parents do, but out of love, not out of justice, out of growth, out of concern for us, not because he's the warden, but because he's our Father. When you start looking at your relationship with God, it changes with how you understand his commandments, his laws, or his instructions. Now, we just spent 10 weeks not too long ago going through the 10 commandments, and I was very clear that this is not the 10 strong suggestions or the 10 great things. This is not a BuzzFeed article, 10 good things you could be doing. These are the 10 commandments of God. And this does not negate that. This does not say that commandments are any lesser than commandments. But it makes you, or helps you to understand what God's intention is behind these commandments. It's not to catch you in a mistake. It's not to penalize you, not to exploit your humanity. It's to make you better, to make you smarter, to have you live closer to the creation that he created you to be. That's the legacy of the Torah. It's not a rule book. It's instructions on how to be better. So when we look at the Bible, when we understand these verses or when we read them at face value, we have to understand that there is a depth here that we might be lacking. Some of this will come from further study, looking into this, but a lot of this is just going to be opening your heart and your mind enough to understand that the words on the page, the ink printed there, is not the end of the story. There was a person who wrote this down, and that person wanted you to know something about God or about yourself or about Jesus. And your goal should be to track down what that meaning is. And I'll let you know, it's a really bummer. I apologize in advance if this shocks you. It's almost never as clear as just what you read. You're going to have to look deeper. You're going to have to ponder. You're going to have to pray to God for enlightenment. That's one of the best things the Holy Spirit does, at least, is spurs you while you're reading and says, this is different than you're thinking right now. So like I said last week, my wrap-up for every single week is kind of read the Bible better. But I challenge you to look at words differently, to understand that what you read, oftentimes, I would almost say every time, it means more than just the English equivalent that we have. And the best that we can do for the people that we're going to share the good news with is to understand what Jesus wants us to understand about this verse. Now, what the English translator wants us to understand, or the publisher wants us to understand, that there's a divine truth behind Scripture. Every verse in the Bible, I fully believe that. You just got to go digging. Hopefully this gives you a shovel. Let us pray.